This is the Energy Makers Show, featuring the innovators, financiers, and policymakers focused on the global energy demand. Brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And here's your host, Paul Dickerson.
Hi, this is Paul Dickerson, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Makers Show. First up, Steve Foster, a partner with Altira Group. Second, we hear from Bob Schucker, founder, president, CEO of Natrion Energy, a company offering new technology for energy storage. All that right after this.
Where will the energy come from to move us forward? From natural sources in abundant supply, or perhaps a man-made source? At NRG, we believe innovation will solve our energy needs. That's why NRG is moving away from fossil fuels towards wind, solar, and other sustainable technologies to power the smart grid, the electric car, and our clean energy future. We're using all of our energy to develop more of it.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Paul Dickerson.
Welcome to another episode of the Energy Makers Show. We are here at the Rice Alliance competition with Steve Foster, partner at Altira. Steve, good to have you on the program.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
So Altira, tell me about it.
So Altira is a 15-year-old venture capital firm based in Denver, Colorado, focused on energy technology.
And any particular side of the house on renewables, efficiency, fossil?
Yeah, we're a little different than a lot of the people who invest in energy. There's been a lot of enthusiasm around renewable energy or clean technology. We really started in oil and gas and moved to power generation, efficiency, and we do a little bit on the renewable side, but much more opportunistically. We really focused on a lot of the traditional fossil fuel-based sources of energy.
So when our CEO friends are thinking where they might pitch their new company for the next round of funding, when should they think about you?
Well, we've been relatively stage agnostic. So, if somebody's got an idea, they certainly can come to us. We've tended to invest a little bit later, particularly on the traditional energy side. But I think if it's really something that's in the power generation or oil and gas business, they should come to us.
All right, so in energy, whether fossil or renewable, where are you seeing some opportunity?
Well, we're very focused on oil and gas. You've seen an explosion in the last 5 years around the whole shale gas play. We think we're at the beginning of that. We think there's a lot more technology that will enable that revolution to sort of happen across the globe, and that we'll get a lot more efficient and open up a lot more resources in that space. And there are other unconventional resources to go after, whether it's shale oil or oil shales. We really just scratched the surface on some of those.
When we're hearing more and more about this enhanced oil recovery and how much oil remains in the ground, I saw a newspaper article saying that we could be one of the world's leading developers of fossil fuels by 2017.
That's exactly right. And enhanced oil recovery has a big role to play in that transition. If you look at the rate at which a lot of known existing proven reserves are coming off, a lot of that can be backfilled by increasing the recovery rate. So 20, 30 years ago, that number might have been in the mid 20%. Now it's in the 30s, getting into the 40s. But there are technologies, whether it's new surfactants or microbial EOR, that can raise that number up. And all of that is essentially free oil to the operator. So huge economic incentive to do it. And particularly in a world with strong oil prices, people are going to want to basically find a way to get more oil out of their wells.
Well, let's dig a little deeply into your portfolio. Pick one of the companies and share it with our audience.
Sure. I'll pick maybe one or two. We try to look at things, I think, a little differently than other people. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. We've got a portfolio company in Boulder, Colorado called OPX Biotechnologies that has a novel platform to do some genetic engineering on an E. coli bug that turns pretty much any kind of sugar into specialty chemicals. They've targeted a number of specialty chemicals, have a big deal with Dow, but they also got a big grant from the ARPA-E group that was set up about 3 years ago to see if they could use that same bug to turn syngas into fatty esters that ultimately could be created into biodiesel. And the reason that potentially is interesting is that if you're waste management or Reliant or one of these big garbage collection landfill businesses, it now changes your business model. Right?
Sure.
So you've got, the nice thing about garbage is it's co-located with population, as is fuel demand. So they could turn that business into basically a collect and convert into a fuel, high-value fuel. So totally changes their business model. People tend to think of garbage as a sort of unwanted byproduct. We're trying to figure out how do we turn that into something of high value. Similarly, we've got another company that's in the coal to liquid fuels business based here in Houston. Very, very interesting technology. One of the things that they're trying to do is to take the CO2 that comes out of that process and potentially other processes and turn that into something useful. Again, could be a fuel, could be a fuel fertilizer. The debate around CO2 is it's unwanted and we're creating too much of it. Our view is that's great. That means it's free. How can we take that as a free feedstock and do something of value with it?
And what's the name of that second company?
It's called Excelergy.
Excelergy,
based here in Houston.
Now, when that one came across your desk, what was it about Excelergy that made you think, that this is one that we ought to look more closely at?
Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of pressure environmentally in the USA. The EPA has put out a whole set of promulgations trying to essentially kill the coal industry. But we have a tremendous amount of coal in the United States. Even at current rates of use, we probably have 250 years of coal. The Chinese have a tremendous amount of coal. Both countries are short on fuels, and this was one of the few technologies that was proven. It was developed in conjunction with the Department of Energy by ExxonMobil over 20 years ago, and then put on a shelf in the 90s when oil prices came down all the way down to $10 a barrel. And so our look at that was said, hey, you've got this huge arbitrage between the value of the BTU content in coal and the value of it as a transportation fuel, and said this is an interesting way to try and play that.
Well, Steve, it's a pleasure to have you on the program today.
Glad to be here. Thanks so much.
The future is here.
You can't see it. It's electric.
At NRG, we're providing clean energy and now charging stations to make the electric car a reality. Kinda makes you want a boogie woogie, doesn't it? NRG, moving clean energy forward.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Paul Dickerson.
Welcome back to the Energy Makers Show. With me now, Bob Schucker, founder, president, CEO of Natrion Energy Corporation. Bob, great to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here, Paul.
Well, I tell you, I was most excited, and we'll get to it in a second, but to have an SBIR Phase 1 and Phase 2 company coming in to visit.
We were fortunate to get those grants from the Department of Energy, and it really is what kicked off all of the work that we're doing in the thin film composite electrolytes that we're applying here in our battery.
Well, and we'll get more to the SBR, but tell me a little bit more about the company. It's storage.
Natrion Energy is a early stage company located in the Woodlands, Texas. We set it up in 2010. The company is chartered with commercializing by scaling up a revolutionary new battery. It's a sodium sulfur battery, which is a rechargeable battery, and the primary application is grid scale storage. Again, most of the work was supported early on by Phase 1 and Phase 2 Small Business Innovation Research grants from the Department of Energy. We've since received grants from the National Science Foundation. We also have funding from Transionics Corporation and from Evonik Industries, which is a large German conglomerate.
Frame for our audience, if you can, the market, how Asia has really been dominating the battery space and what you're trying to do.
And they still are. In the rechargeable battery area, and specifically for grid scale storage, there's really only one company that has dominated the market, and that's NGK Insulators in Japan. NGK has taken what Ford Motor Company invented in 1966, and which originally was intended to be applied to electric vehicles, and has scaled it up to produce batteries for grid scale storage. They currently produce 150 megawatts a year. They've got over 300 megawatts installed capacity, which may sound like a lot, but it really isn't. But they are the dominant player in grid scale storage.
All right, and how is your technology different, better?
We've basically redesigned the sodium sulfur battery from the ground up. There are a couple of things that are different between ours and the NGK battery. First is the NGK battery's electrolyte is about 1 millimeter thick. That's about the size of this disc, and it's a ceramic. And so it's breakable. And the reason that it has to stay thick is so that you won't mix sodium and sulfur at an elevated temperature, which could cause an explosion. So you can see that these are very fragile. fairly easy to break. And that's one of the things that we can get around. Even though our electrolyte is 1/40th the thickness of the NGK electrolyte, it doesn't break. And it's very, very flexible. So that there's no problem with breaking, there's no problem with mixing the sodium and the sulfur, and we get a much higher current with this than you do with the thicker electrolytes. Secondly, our electrolytes are planar. That is, they're flat sheets like a piece of paper, so we can stack multiple sheets on top of each other and pack more area per unit volume. The NGK cell is like a big test tube, and so you can't pack nearly as much into a given cell, which means our volume will be smaller and our weight will be smaller. And basically, the thickness of the electrolyte then allows us to operate at a much lower temperature. The debit to the sodium-sulfur battery made by NGK is that they operate at 350 degrees Celsius. That's 662 degrees Fahrenheit, and we can operate at room temperature. We're doing testing at room temperature right now, and that means that everything is just safer.
Sure.
All the way around.
All right, so what will this ultimately look like in the field?
In the field, it will look like a number of small individual cells hooked together, much in the same way that you would AA batteries in a flashlight. So we'll have a 1 kilowatt hour battery that's our standard cell, and we'll hook those together in parallel and series to get the power that we need.
Now, Bob, in Texas, the state has just paid to string a grid to West Texas to capture a lot of this wind. There may be some solar electrons put on the grid. I'm assuming this is a big opportunity for you.
Absolutely. Grid scale storage can be anything from wind farms to solar photovoltaics to electric power generators who want to shift their load from off-peak times to peak times. But particularly wind and solar are a big opportunity for us. You know, wind doesn't blow at a constant speed, and when it's blowing hard, which is most of the time at night, is when you don't really need the energy, and you can't produce solar power at night. And so it would be a great idea to be able to store both of those, use them when you need them, and displace imported oil.
And you've targeted grid. Is there thought of home or auto?
Absolutely. The thing that NGK can't do because of the high temperature is operate these things at home. By operating at room temperature, we can go to community energy storage. We can go to small individual batteries for homes to complement solid oxide fuel cells, for instance. We can go to electric vehicle batteries. A Chevy Volt has a 25 kilowatt hour battery. We could provide something that size with no problem.
Well, and getting to the sodium sulfur, we hear a lot about these rare earth minerals, how they're being mined in Asia, and how that can be a competitive problem or even a manufacturing problem for U.S.-based battery technologies. How does that affect you?
Sodium and sulfur could not be cheaper. They're really, sodium is contained in seawater, and you recover it, and we have an abundant supply of that. Sulfur is being produced by refineries, and it's lying on the ground, basically. There's an abundance of sulfur. So there's no shortage of supply, and the materials of construction are very cheap. So we have no problem with competition of rare earths or lithium from Bolivia for the batteries that we would produce.
So it's taking what can be waste of others and turning it into a high-value product.
Exactly right. As a matter of fact, we've got an application where sodium can be used to treat heavy oil to take the sulfur out, and the sodium sulfide that you make can be the feed to the battery in this case.
Well, let's talk about the company itself. It's early stage. Can you walk us through your path to growth over the next 12, 18 months?
Right. We are a very small company, and we're in the process of trying to raise an angel round right now. This battery and where we are now is the culmination of 9 years of research, and we're at the point now where we need to start scaling up. So we have electrolytes now that are about this thick, so this is about 1.25 inches, and we're testing these routinely in the lab. But in order to become commercial, we need to have electrolytes that are probably a square foot, and then we would stack multiple sizes. So our goal over the next 9 months is to go from this size to something that's about a square foot, which would be one sheet, and then to go from there to stacking those sheets to get to a 1 kilowatt hour battery by the end of a 2-year period after that.
Well, and what made you decide to go first to the federal government and apply to this SBIR program?
We have I have worked with a number of companies over the years in my career with Exxon, and always found that the Department of Energy's program, particularly in the SBIR program, was a very good way to start to kind of jumpstart a program like this. And small companies don't have a lot of money, and so it's a good way to get the program started, generate the data that you need without diluting the company with investors, and particularly investors don't like to invest in research anyhow.
Well, and for our audience members who don't know, it's what, a 3-stage program. The first stage you apply, you get a certain amount of money to do what?
The first stage is proof of principle, basically, and for the Department of Energy and for the National Science Foundation now it's $150,000. And it's intended to last about 6 months, and you have a very specific set of milestones that you need to meet. And at the end of the Phase 1 program, you can then apply for a Phase 2 grant, and it takes about 6 months, and if you're chosen, all of these are about $750,000. So when you get through, you've got about $900,000 in the program. And this is increasing because the cost of doing research is increasing as time goes along. But the third phase is you really need to find a commercial partner in order to help move these things along.
Well, Bob, I'm excited to see where the company goes. We're lucky to have you in Houston working on some of these national priorities. It's a real pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure to be here, and I could not be more excited about what we're doing.
Well, thank you for coming by. And that concludes this episode of The Energy Makers, heard on the radio nationwide and seen right here at TheEnergyMakers.com. I'm Paul Dickerson, and we'll see you next week.